I think it should be obvious by now that Brexiteer promises are about as useful as a chocolate fireguard at this point. Michael Gove came out and said and promised that don't worry, we'll have higher environmental protections, not lower. Meanwhile, of course, we've signed things like, the Pacific Partnership, which allows all kinds of crazy environmental damage to be done on the other side of the world and then sold here for a very, very big profit. That's not a good thing for the environment as a whole. And then, of course, here in the UK, we have seen them strip environmental protections, the Environmental Agency, completely underfunded, not even fully staffed. We have seen rivers being reported on by like the RSPB, Greenpeace, the river protection agencies, all up and down the country, saying that these rivers are getting worse. We've had constant pollution on our beaches and in our seas along the rivers. We've had reports about some rivers are close to ecological collapse. We've just had the new announcement that with the housing changes that are going to allow and speed up more pollution of the rivers. We've got the Elam changes, which have allowed farmers to use more polluting chemicals so they don't have to worry about runoff. We said this right from the start, that the UK public was going to become increasingly aware of just how important regulations really are. But that was the whole point of Brexit, especially for the Brexiteers, that they want to get rid of all these regulations because they are free market fundamentalists. They do not want the government involved in any sort of regulations whatsoever. But that is now what is happening. This is why government regulation is so important. These departments have to be funded, they have to be staffed, and more importantly, we have to have the right rules in place so that they do not cause huge harm, not only to the environment, but in this case, for public health. So let's find out why we are fastly becoming the, well, according to this, the toxic poster child of Europe. I think that says it all. So, as always, before we do begin, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a notification link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So, let's crack on into this. So, this comes from The Guardian with the title of The UK Fails to Ban 36 Harmful Pesticides Outlawed for Use in the EU. So the UK has failed to ban 36 pesticides that are not allowed for use in the EU, as campaigners have said it is becoming the toxic poster child for Europe. Though ministers promised that the UK would not water down the EU-derived environmental standards after Brexit, there have been multiple instances, because we've been talking about this constantly, of divergence since the country left the bloc. Now the country is failing to phase out pesticides that have been found to be harmful to human health and the environment at the same rate as the EU. And according to the research from the Pesticide Action Network, about 13 of the 36 chemicals that are considered highly hazardous pesticides under UN definitions used to identify the most harmful substances. 4 of these are highly toxic to bees, 1 contaminates water, and 1 is highly toxic to aquatic organisms. So, why have they not been involved in regulations? Well, of course, we said this all the time, that they would just not be interested in regulations. They would be far, far more interested in stripping them away rather than actually building protections on these things so that this does not happen. But this is exactly going the way that we thought it would go. And I say at the beginning, the UK public really, really needs to become aware of just how important regulations really are. Because they have not had to think about regulations or even have discussions about regulations in Parliament because they were all carried out in the EU. And when they came over here to be approved, sure, the government just went, sure. And thus the discussions were not had. Of course, the Eurosceptics would vote against them because, well, it wasn't that they were regulations coming from Europe, it's just that they hated regulations full stop. Like I say, they're not going to do any form of regulation to change this. But continues. So 30 out of the 36 were allowed in use in the EU when the UK left on the 31st of January, but have since been banned by the bloc. And the remaining 6 have been approved by the UK government, but not by the EU since then. The UK government has given emergency authorization every year since Brexit for the use of the nanocidal that is a highly toxic to bees, in the same time that the EU has banned the emergency use of these chemicals. Nick Mole from Pan UK has said the UK is becoming the toxic poster child of Europe. The government has repeatedly promised that our environmental standards won't slip post Brexit. And here we are, less than 4 years later, and we are already seeing our standards fall far behind those of the EU. With UK bees and other pollinators in decline, our waters never more polluted. Now it is the time to be taking steps to protect nature. Instead, the government is choosing to expose British wildlife to an ever more toxic soup of chemicals. And here's the thing, the UK public, because of the rivers, because of the smell that this pollution causes in the river and on the coast, every summer this has been a continuing story ever since 2020 when people really started to notice this. We've had it last year and we will have it next year, possibly. So long as these rules are not improved and like the water companies are not taken to task, so long as we do not have like our regulatory bodies properly funded and properly staffed, this is going to continue. And it gets even worse. So, of these chemicals, 12 have been classified as carcinogens. 9 have been found to be of endocrine disruptors, which therefore interfere with hormones and are linked to infertility. 8 are developmental or reproductive toxins that have also been linked to fertility problems, and 2 are uh, clyosygrinate inhibitors that can impair the respiratory system, and 1 is classified as acutely toxic. Researchers have said that divergence was caused partly by the UK new licensing regime of these chemicals after the UK government decided to grant all pesticides with licenses due to expire before December of 2023 an automatic license extension of 3 years. Previously, all pesticides had a maximum license of 15 years before they had to be reapproved. PAN is currently calling for the government to bring standards in line with the EU to protect both human health, the agricultural industry, and the environment. Mole said that the gap emerging between the UK and the EU pesticide standards is incredibly concerning for our human health and environmental protections, but also for future UK agriculture, as our standards fall further and farther behind those of our largest trading partner. UK food exports containing pesticides that the EU growers aren't allowed to use are likely to be rejected. That is going to have a huge impact if that starts to happen. And sooner or later, trust me, the EU will start to react on that. But he continues, given that the EU still accounts for around 60% of UK agricultural exports, the impact on farmers could be devastating. All the EU needs to do is, well, look, you're using pesticides, it's contaminating the food. You can't sell your food here anymore. That's 60% of our agricultural input to our biggest, you know, export gone. That will be devastating, devastating for farmers. But of course, a spokesperson for the Department of Environmental, Food and Rural Affairs has said that the DEFRA spokesperson said a very strict regulation only permits the sale and use of pesticides where scientific assessment clearly shows that they will not harm people or pose an unacceptable risk to the environment. What do you think those scientists who have already been out there and already said, yep, threat to the environment? What have we all just been reading through from what this guy has been saying? How toxic and how many of these chemicals are linked to things like infertility, respiratory diseases. The information's already there. you don't need it. But of course, he continues. Pesticides have to be authorized for the use on the market in Great Britain by our expert regulator, the Health and Safety Executive, or by ministers following those thorough scientific assessments. More widely, Health and Safety Executive is trying to develop a new program to review our pesticide approvals and can take action to review approval at any time if they identify serious concerns. Well, we already clearly have serious concerns here. The fact that we've got 36 harmful pesticides that have been outlawed in the EU, and yet they're doing nothing. And all it's going to take is the EU going, yeah, you're using pesticides that we have banned. We can see it is in the food you're importing to us. No, thank you. That's all it's going to take. And that could very likely well happen. That could very likely well happen. That is a potential scenario. That could devastate British farming. Because we saw how devastating mad cow disease still very much affecting the British beef industry and the dairy industry to this day. And yet, if something like this happens, that will be devastating to UK farming completely. And yet the government ignoring it because they are not interested in regulating. All the thing of that DEFRA spokesperson said there, nice words, but we are already clearly falling behind. We are becoming, as this guy said here in the article, the toxic poster child of Europe. It's not a good reputation to have. Not a good reputation to have at all. But we said this would happen because these Brexiteers are free market fundamentalists. They do not care about regulations one bit. They were never going to increase regulations. They were never going to introduce any new regulations whatsoever. They were only going to strip regulations, as we have seen time and time and time again. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the notification link called Buy Me Coffee, and of course, the Patreon page, the YouTube subscription, the Pony Club, and of course, the YouTube thank you button as well. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.